Alright, welcome to this episode of my playthrough of Armored Core 4 Answer. Actually, for that matter, welcome to my playthrough of Armored Core 4 Answer. Not just this episode, the whole thing. So, this is a series that I have actually loved for many, many, many years. It's made by a company called From Software, which most people nowadays know from what's called the Souls series. Meaning like Demon's Souls, Dark Souls 2, Dark Souls 3, yada yada yada, and its sort of spiritual successor, Bloodborne. From Software started the Armored Core series on the original PlayStation, and there's been a bunch of games in the series actually, spanning 5 generations of games, not of consoles. So the the main generations are the numbered entries: Armored Core 2, Armored Core 3, Armored Core 4, and Armored Core 5. Each of those has kind of, I guess you could call them expansion pack games, like Armored Core 2: Another Age, took place in the same generation as Armored Core 2, right? And each of those numbered generations refers to the generation of Armored Core, which is the humanoid type battle mech that you saw in the intro video. More commonly referred to as an AC in the earlier games, just because saying Armored Core every time is a bit long, and military types tend to like their acronyms. So Armored Core 4 Answer, as you may have guessed, it takes place in the 4th generation, Armored Core 4 Answer. So this is my favorite game of the series, namely being the Armored Core cutscenes have always shown what you saw in the intro video: very fast-paced, flexible, adaptable combat style. But the gameplay, sometimes it got close, but it never really got that same level of fast-paced flexibility that you saw in the videos. Armored Core 4 Answer does. The gameplay can be very, very fast-paced, and you can do things a lot of different ways. Before we get started, there's a few things I want to lay out for you, just so you know what you're getting into. First of all, the Armored Core series is all about mission-based structures, right? You play a freelance mercenary who can take missions from a variety of different employers, and you can favor one employer over others if you want to, right? That's an option. There's also a very, very high degree of customizability in the way you build your Armored Core. The original game, back on the PlayStation 1, I think boasted over 400 different parts that you could use for your Armored Core. The sheer customizability and flexibility in how you built your AC was staggering for the time. And so it's a game that kind of combines equal parts fast-paced action and information. When you're comparing different models of legs, for example, on your Armored Core, you have to compare the different types. Some models of legs have very high load capacities, meaning you can put more other stuff elsewhere on your mech, on your AC, but they tend to be slow. If you want an AC that's fast, then you usually have to sacrifice load capacity or armor plating or things like that. So there's actually a lot to consider when it comes to designing your AC, and a lot to choose. So basically what I'm going to do is I'm going to skip a lot of the boring menu stuff for this playthrough, and mostly focus on the episodes, or the missions, shall we say. And the other thing about that is that this particular game, Armored Core 4 Answer, there's actually 5 different paths through the game. Now, most of it splits off in the late game, so the way I'm going to do this is I'm kind of going to do this as a choose-your-own-adventure style, right? When we hit a split point where the game could go one way or it could go another way, I'm going to give you the option, and you're going to be able to choose which way you want to pursue. And I'll clearly label it in the video titles and everything like that as well, right? And so I'm going to show you all 5, and you can choose which avenues to which avenues to follow, which path to follow. That's the phrase I'm looking for. And I'm going to do it in a way where you won't see the same mission in 2 different paths, right? So if you want to see the whole game, you have to watch all 5 paths. The other thing you need to know, given that this is a later entry in the series, there's some information I want you to be aware of. First of all, I've already told you about one acronym. AC stands for Armored Core. The other name you'll hear, the other names you'll hear when it comes to like mechanized machines, combat machines, MT stands for what was it again? I've just got my reference my reference here. MT stands for Muscle Tracer. Now, whereas armored cores were specifically developed for combat use, muscle tracers were designed more for civilian use, things like construction, carrying loads, things like that, right? They tend to be much smaller. They're very lightly armed and armored, if any at all. They're kind of the base level enemy, right? The other thing you'll hear is what's called a normal. And you hear that specifically in this generation, Armored Core, the 4th generation. Normals refer to the older Armored Cores, the 1st, 2nd, and 3rd generations. Because the 4th generation of Armored Cores is referred to as Nexts, like NEXT, plural, Nexts. And what makes the 4th generation really, really different from the previous generations in-game is something called Kojima technology. So, Kojima technology was really introduced in Armored Core 4, and From Software entrusted the North American localization of Armored Core 4 to Sega, and Sega just did a really, really bad job. If I'm perfectly honest, the localization, the translations are terrible. So I'm just not even going to bother showing you that. I'm just going to basically sum up what you need to know right here, right now. All right, so there's a decent amount to know about Kojima technology. Some of it's going to be explained in this game, but I want to give you an overview before we get started here. So I'm just going to read from the fan wiki here to kind of describe it for you. Kojima technology is a recent breakthrough in mechanical engineering that was first developed in a joint venture by Aquavit and Ray Leonard, as soon after replicated by Omer Science Technology. Kojima particles, so named after the original scientist responsible for discovering them, represent a treasure trove of possibilities in warfare and are the defining part of what allows Nexts to outclass their forbearing normals so easily, like I mentioned. That makes me realize I should probably explain one other thing. The world of Armored Core, for answer, is a world post-governments. There was an event called the National Dismantlement War, in which basically governments lost all effectiveness. They could not effectively run nations or countries or their people. And as a result, corporations took over, actually. So there's no such thing as countries anymore. There's no such thing as governments. Instead, there is simply companies, corporations. Aquavit and Ray Leonard and Omer Science Technology being 3 of them in this generation. Kojima particles are normally shown to be glowing green particles that remain airborne for long periods of time. This holds especially true in colder climates. Kojima particles have the rare habit of turning semi-solid when they collide with each other. And that trait is actually very, very important for how Kojima technology is used, especially in this generation. As the new Nexts were designed, the scientists designing them came up with the idea of trapping Kojima particles in a spherical force field around the Next. As an object passes through the field, its energy compresses the particles in front of it to a solid state. The foreign object is meant to be halted by the solid wall, or even destroyed by the Kojima particle's habit of rapidly eroding through solid matter that comes into contact with it. As tests proved the theory to be correct, the primal armor had been invented, making most weapons do significantly less damage. It does, however, seem that energy-based weaponry have a greater ability to pierce through primal armor due to the rounds being made from a non-solid matter, which in turn do not compress the Kojima particles as much as a solid shell can. Makes sense? However, weapons that fire non-solid rounds do not seem to damage the Kojima shield as much as a solid round. When used in weapons, Kojima particles are capable of causing massive eroding damage and Kojima contamination. Offensive Kojima weapons were first developed by Aquavit, then by Global Armaments Europe, and after the Lynx War, Taurus and Omer Science Technology. Various forms of these weapons exist. There are Kojima cannons, which are charge large amounts of Kojima particles, then proceed to fire them as one cohesive beam. There are also Kojima missiles, which carry a volatile Kojima payload and do significant damage upon impact, and Kojima blades, which utilize a directed pinpoint close-range Kojima explosion that has the appearance of a user punching the target. Sol Dios cannons are larger battleship versions of Kojima cannons and have been shown to demonstrate another characteristic of Kojima particles, Kojima boosting. Where basically Kojima particles are used to as a method of propulsion rather than offense or defense, right? Now, in Armored Core 4, the company Ray Leonard was destroyed during the Lynx War. Basically, there was the National Dismantlement War, which got rid of governments, and then after there were no governments to control them, the corporations basically waged war on each other, and that was the Lynx War. In the first few generations of Armored Core, the pilots of Armored Core of ACs were called Ravens. At a certain point, they became called, I think it was in 4th generation, they became called Lynx. Now, one of the other things that happened as part of after the National Dismantlement War is the corporations became self-policing, right? To prevent any company from stepping out of line, the big threat was another company taking offense to that and attacking them. And the companies kind of feared any company getting an advantage over the other companies. And so they actually put up what are called, what's the name here? Assault cells. Now, assault cells were automated weapons platform that are flying in the very high atmosphere or low orbit. The idea was it prevented any company from gaining access to space and therefore gaining an advantage over any other company. Because the assault cells would just shoot down anything that got too close or tried to leave the atmosphere. Needless to say, that trapped humanity on Earth. Not great, especially considering actually Armored Core 2 takes place on Mars. So in Armored Core 1, Earth has been highly polluted, and so all of civilization lives underground, and so Armored Core 1 is basically the story of humans returning to the surface of Earth. Armored Core 2 is, okay, we've returned to the surface of Earth, now let's go beyond, and we terraformed and moved to Mars, and what do you know, corporations mess things up. So we return to Earth, and now with Armored Core 4, we're trapped on Earth because of these assault cells that the corporations put up there that prevent us from going back out into space. Yeah, it's a long series with a rich history here. On the topic of Kojima weapons, Ray Leonard has anti-satellite cannons called Ehrenberg. They're implied to be giant Kojima cannons, surpassing even Sol Dios cannons, as evidenced by its need to charge and the large Kojima detonation that occurs when it's destroyed. Now, there's a disadvantage to Kojima particles. These seem great, but as you kind of heard before, while capable of being used for many different roles, Kojima particles have the significant drawback of being extremely radioactive and highly polluting. During the National Dismantlement War, contamination levels were low due to limited next action in the short one-sided conflict. Pardon me. But during and after the Lynx War, massive Kojima contamination caused the Earth's surface to be extremely polluted. So, Kojima particles kind of integral to this generation of technology. And knowing the history, knowing that we are trapped on Earth because of the assault cells that the companies put up, and because of the assault cells, nobody's really able to do anything about it because you get too close and the assault cells start shooting you down. Which is where the Ehrenberg anti-satellite cannons come into play. They were a plan by Ray Leonard to shoot down the assault cells and kind of open the path to space back up. So here's how I'm going to start. Now that you have all of that information, this game starts with a fairly in-depth tutorial that kind of shows you all the parts of the game before starting the actual missions. It's going to explain. I mentioned before, this is a game that combines action and fast pace with information. You get a lot of information in this game. If you're curious about that information, watch through this tutorial. I'll be explaining the kinds of things that you'll be seeing on screen, what they mean, and what they are. If you're not interested in that, if you just want to skip ahead to the action, what I'll do is I'll put on the bottom of the screen here somewhere the timestamp of when we're done that, so you can just kind of skip ahead to that point and skip past the tutorial. Because while it does contain a lot of information and will help you understand what you're seeing on screen, it's not particularly exciting or energetic. So, without further ado, let's get started, and I hope you enjoy this as much as I do. As you can tell, I quite enjoy this series, but I've been with it for a long time. So let's get going, okay? Alright, so a few things you're going to see right off the bat here. At the very, very, very top, flashing yellow, you're going to see I believe that's the energy gauge. So doing things like firing energy weapons or using boosters uses energy. As that bar flashing yellow depletes, once it's out, you can't use those kinds of things. It will recharge over time, but if you completely deplete it, it recharges slower. So you don't want to do that. You kind of want to stay above that level. The big numbers below that are your armor points, or AP. So the default starting AC has 35,888 AP. Whenever you take damage, that number goes down. If it hits 0, you are destroyed. It's not something you want. Now, the big thick bar underneath the energy gauge and beside the AP number is your primal armor, your Kojima charge, basically. You can use, so basically, as you take as your primal armor takes damage, that will deplete. And there's other uses for it, as you'll see in a little bit here. Up in the top right, you see the mini-map, which it's really more of a radar. It doesn't show you a map, it shows you where enemies are relative to you. Up, down, left, right, forward, back. Along the right side of the screen, you will see the elevation gauge. Right now we are at 0, which is ground level, basically. So, what we want to do is so we're boost dashing forward to the destination. And so now it's showing us how to turn, so we can turn, and away we go. So we can look down, we can look up, all those kinds of things. And reset the view. That's the first tutorial, the very basic. Basic movement, B, obviously. So, I mentioned the use of boosters. Boosters do more than just scooting you along the ground. You can boost up into the sky. To a destination, like so. There's also quick boosting, which you can do in multiple directions, not just forward. It's just a quick boost of speed. Overt boost was originally introduced in Armored Core 2, and it drains your PA gauge. PA is what I was talking about, the Kojima particle charge. It's the primal armor gauge. So as you can see, Overt boost gets you going quite fast. One thing I forgot to mention, between the PA gauge and the radar, you see a speedometer. Right now we're going 0 kilometers an hour. If we do an overt boost, We go up to 1,300 kilometers an hour. These things, the scale on these things is huge. Attack basics. So now, here's the other thing you'll see. Up in the top right, you see RA. That means for right arm. So I've got 36 out of 36 bullets in the clip and 180 in reserve. And left arm, up in the top left, same thing. 36 in the clip, 180 in reserve. Now you'll notice that these MTs ahead of me here, my AC has locked on to one. That's the one with the red. And you can adjust. And it's also got a little number underneath it that's saying it's 300, about 300 away. That's the distance. If I fire, then you see another number pop up, and that's the amount of damage I do to it. So I just did... I just did about 2,000 damage to each one when I fired. So when it comes to switching weapons, you can... So now, up in the top right, you see I've got RA, which is right arm, and I've got RB, which is right back, which are the shoulder-mounted weapons. So I switch to right back. My missile launcher on my right shoulder comes into play. And switch. You can also switch your left, and now this one's got a cannon on the left shoulder. Now, weapon types. Rifle. So a rifle is a pretty standard slow-firing, high-damage weapon. Does about 2,000 damage. There we go. Now the cannon up on my left shoulder is a laser cannon. Laser cannons are energy-based, they don't use physical ammunition. So they do drain the energy gauge, as you'll see at the top. The laser blade is currently attached on the left arm. Is a short-range, slow, extremely high-damage weapon. The laser blade did about 5,000 damage as opposed to 2,000 like we were doing before. I am going to need to adjust the controls here because this is not my usual control scheme, which is why things look a little clumsy. And as you can see, missile launchers are exactly as they sound. Shoulder weapons. So shoulder weapons are a little bit different. So there's the back weapons, which I mentioned were mounted on the shoulders. They're kind of mounted behind the shoulder. The actual shoulder weapons are the things you see sticking out to the side, right? So shoulder weapons, it's SH up in the top left there. Ah, nope, wrong button. That was the overboost. So shoulder weapons rarely require a lock-on, and there's other things you can put in shoulder as well. Assault armor. Now, here's the thing. You remember how we mentioned that you could put the Kojima particles in a sphere around your mech, and then that was what that was your assault armor, or that was your assault armor, or your primal armor. Pardon me. Assault armor is when you take the Kojima particles that contain your primal armor, and you expel them rapidly into a giant, larger sphere. It does a massive amount of damage to anything close to you, but it leaves you without primal armor until it recharges, obviously. This is what it looks like. Kaboom. Obviously, I need to wait for the PA gauge to recharge before I can use it. These NTs are just kind of walking back and forth. And as you can see, it leaves you without your primal armor actually for quite a while. The yellow flashing area only just started to recharge. There we go. And when you see that little green flash, that means that your PA gauge has recharged. This is a practice battle here. Yeah, I'm definitely not used to this particular control scheme. So I need to change that before we actually start the game proper. Now, the other thing you may have noticed is that the targeting reticule turned green for a bit there. That means that there's something in the way. That this hit would actually be unsuccessful.
More than 10 years have passed since the National Dismantlement War. A league of corporations has taken control of the world. To escape the pollution that poisons the surface of the planet, they have built massive floating platforms called cradles. Only there, 7,000 meters above the ground, is the air clean and safe. Already half of mankind lives in the skies. The planet's surface has become a battlefield where armies fight to control the resource plants that feed the cradles. As the war came to a close, giant humanoid weapons called Armored Core Nexts enabled the League to firmly establish their rule of the planet. Their pilots are called Lynx. Fearing the power and independence of these Nexts, the League left them behind on the surface. The Lynx now work as mercenaries for an organization called Collard. While the League armies derive their power from massive arms forts, the once mighty Nexts are consigned to the poisoned Earth, serving as foot soldiers in the never-ending economic war.
All right. Well, if you skipped the little tutorials there, welcome back. And if you did watch the tutorials, welcome to the main menu. After every mission, this is where you end up back. Your list of available missions shows up on the left, and then any side things show up on the right. I'm going to give you a quick tour around before taking a mission, and then we'll get going. So, first thing I want to show you, this top one here, ACSIS, AC System, I'm assuming, shows you the things you can do with your craft. Now, I've beaten this game before, and so you kind of play through, and it takes you right back to the beginning. So rather than starting with the basic machine and the basic equipment, I'm going to show you what I have. So here's an example. If you go into Assemble, the way this works is across the top, like on the left half of the screen, across the top are all the different types of part. And then down the left side, up and down, are all the different things you could put there, right? So, for example, we're in the right arm unit, and then we got left arm unit, and we got right back unit, left back unit, shoulder unit, which I believe is incompatible with the current shoulders I have, right hanger unit, left hanger unit, head, core, arms, legs, FCS. FCS is like your targeting computer. FCS allows you to target other machines, but also allows them to target you. Generator provides power. The more power you have, the more you can do things like boosting and stuff like that. Your main booster, your back booster, your side booster, your overt booster, and we're back to right arm unit. Now, if we go to something like, for example, let's go to the legs. I mentioned legs before. If you want to, you can actually pull up this view here, which kind of shows yeah, these have, good mobility, good defense, but low AP and low attack capabilities. In its current state, right? And if I go slide through the different legs, you see how they affect things, right? So, for example, these guys here reduce my mobility, but increase my defense and AP compared to what I currently have. So they're slower, right? And if I go one further, this is all of the actual data, right? If I choose these legs, red numbers mean worse, blue numbers mean better, right? So these legs, like the legs below I'm currently using, have worse AP and worse ballistic defense, but they have better energy defense, better primal armor capability, worse stability, which means if you go for a long fall, it'll take more time for your AC to stabilize itself so you can take an action. Better average speed, but worse turning ability. There's a lot of information here, and I'm not going to go over everything for you because, frankly, it's information overload unless you actually take the time to compare bit by bit, and there's no point for me to include it in this video because you're not building it, I am. So I've made... The point is, there's tons of customizability to match your playstyle, whatever that is. If you want to build a slow, heavy mech that can take a beating, you don't care about avoiding incoming attacks or anything like that, you just want to plod through and use overwhelming firepower, you can. If you want to have a fast, lightweight AC that kills by death through 1,000 paper cuts, you can. Those are all options available to you. And to give you an idea of what some of the different ones look like, these are like more heavy legs. So you see how they're big, bulky, and squared. There's reverse joint legs, which kind of makes them look a bit like chicken walkers, right? There's four-leg designs. So instead of having a bipedal system, you've got four legs, and you kind of crawl around. There's tank legs, which don't... you can't jump with tank legs like you can with others. These guys just roll along. And there's like hover tank legs as well, right? Where you just kind of float there. Again, you can't jump, but hover tank legs tend to give up some of the carry capacity for better speed compared to standard tank legs. Point being, there's a lot of things you can do. We're not going to go through all of it because there's no point to it. You can also save, in this game you can save multiple designs of AC. So I've got a few different ACs designed for different purposes. I've got my general use AC, I've got my, which I use most of the time, but then I've also got an AC that is specifically designed for taking on other ACs. Because ACs, as you might have been able to tell, are much more powerful than your standard MT or anything like that, right? So if I switch to my my default, yeah, I just screwed that up. Alright, I fixed it there. I accidentally overwrote the design instead of loading it. So, I've switched to my standard design, which just going to give you a little bit of a quick overview here. So, in both arms, in both hands, I have the Motor Cobra machine gun, right? Designed by the Line Ark company. On the right back, I have a scatter missile, and on the left back, I have a rail cannon. So basically, my arms do the continuous regular suppression fire, whereas my back weapons do the heavy hitting. I also use one of the things you mentioned. Remember how in the tutorial I mentioned there's the radar, which shows you where everything is. Some head designs have built-in radar. I use a head design that does have a built-in radar, so I don't have to waste a slot on having a separate radar. I've got a special core and arms and legs, which are you gain by playing a certain or beating a certain mission at a certain difficulty. They're based on one of the opponent ACs you're going to see later in the game called White Glint. I've got basically the best boosters, FCS, generator, things like that I can afford with the carry capacity and everything else. The other things to be aware of, you can change the paint job, you can change the colors, the designs, whatever you like. You can shop for new parts, but I've bought everything, and this is just my preferred playthrough. I figure it's better to show you the cool stuff rather than just going through the basic stuff and gradually building up. Things like that. The other thing I'm going to show you, if you go into System, this is where you can save the game, load the game, delete the game, things like that, game settings. Partnership is like a cooperative mode. We're not going to be doing that. And there's free play, where basically you can go through and you can replay missions that you've already beaten, or things like that. So I'm going to do a little bit of tune-up behind the scenes. I'm going to fade through black while I do that, and then we'll do the first mission of the game, Attack on Line Ark. Alright, well, I've completed that fine-tuning behind the scenes in the menu, making sure I've got the right control scheme and the right layout and everything like that. It's been a long time since I've played this game, so I was just kind of refamiliarizing myself with the controls and everything like that. So, the way these missions work is when you choose a mission, you get a briefing from the employer, and then you can choose to accept the contract or not. You do the mission, and then based on whether or not you completed the objective, they pay you, and that's what that number on the right there is. So this mission is going to pay out 200,000 credits. Now, because you're a freelance mercenary, things like damage to your AC and ammunition actually costs you money. So if you use a lot of ammunition, that comes out of your paycheck. So that's kind of how that works. Is you can't just be brute force. You have to actually be smart about it. So let's choose Attack on Line Ark.
This is your mission. Eradicate the defensive units deployed in the Line Ark zone. As you know, Line Ark is the main base of the anti-establishment forces that oppose the Cradles. We have tried to negotiate peacefully with these revolutionaries, but they have refused our overtures and continue their violent attacks. This mission is a show of force to encourage the enemy to rejoin negotiations. We never like to resort to violence, but on this occasion, we have no choice. Line Ark's main weapon, White Glint, is currently operating in another area. It will not become a risk in this operation. Note that this mission is a test run of your capabilities. We trust that you will deliver a successful result.
So, that's the starting mission. You're being hired by the League of Ruling Companies against Line Ark. The objective is simply to defeat all enemies. Let's go.
Commence mission. Destroy all Line Ark defense units.
A league next? Damn it, not now!
So one thing I should mention, one of the things I love about From Software is their official stance on things is that there is no such thing as a cheap way to play their games. If you can find a way to play it that gives you an advantage, they consider it valid. So, as such, one of the things built into this game is something called regulations.
Confirmed. Half the targets have been destroyed.
Damn! Are we doing any damage? Primal armor? First, we have to break down that primal armor.
Now, with regulations, they kind of change the basics of how the game works. In this particular case, the regulation I'm using means that things like flying take 0 energy cost. That means I can do all kinds of aerial acrobatics that I want, and it's fun and enjoyable, and I don't ever have to worry about running out of power and crashing to the ground.
Only a few targets remaining.
Our standard weapons are useless! Where are our normals?
We've confirmed all targets destroyed. Mission complete. Well done. Almost perfect. But don't get too high on yourself yet, rookie. These enemies were nothing to write home about.
And this is the scorecard you get at the end of every mission. It says you were paid 200,000 credits. You had to pay 25,960 credits in ammo and 16,100 credits in repair, which means you got paid a total of 157,940 credits, which gives you a rank S. Now, it uses the Japanese ranking system, so S is actually the best. There's, I think, D, C, B, A, S. And you can accept the mission results, you can retry it, or you can give up, right? So now, we've got 3 missions to choose from. We can attack the naval port of Mimir, we can defeat the arms fort Gigabase, or we can attack B7. Before we choose any of those, though, one thing I do want to point out is, did you notice the scale of that mission? When I was walking on it, that was a highway. My AC's footprint, like the 2 feet standing in standard mode, took 1 whole lane. I believe, canonically, armored cores are about 10 meters tall. They're big. From Software has always had an excellent sense of the grandiose, the great scale of things. The other thing, of course, they're famous for? Difficulty. You may have heard this a lot about the Souls series, but the Armored Core series is no different. They don't make their games to be easy. They make their games to be hard and challenging, which is why their stance is, if you can find something in the game that gives you a valid advantage, or that gives you an advantage, it's valid. They fully support you to do that. That's their intent. So, I know this was a big information dump with only 1 mission of gameplay, but I'm going to call an end to the episode there. Click over there, join me next time as we play through the next few missions. It's going to be much more mission-based from here on out, with still some commentary and little inputs when I feel it's necessary. See you there!